You are listening to the RAMA Blueprints podcast, Extra Commentary. Tres generaciones, three voices. Nuestra Sagrada Salud, Community Mental Health, commentary by Dr. Sal Nunez. Welcome to the RAMA Blueprints podcast. I'm your host, Socorro Gamboa. The following is commentary by Dr. Sal Nunez on the May 28, 2026 live episode, Nuestra Sagrada Salud, Community Mental Health, recorded at Brava Women for the Arts in San Francisco's Mission District. Welcome to the RAMA Blueprints podcast. I'm your host, Socorro Gamboa. We are honored to share this space through the sacred lands we stand on, from the Chumash and Geese Gabrielino peoples in Southern California to the Ohlone in the Northern California lands. Our guest commentator today is Dr. Salvador Nunez. Dr. Salvador Nunez is a PhD, a licensed psychologist, licensed marriage and family therapist, researcher, community advocate, educator, and consultant. He's a 10-year faculty member at City College of San Francisco and founding director of the Community Mental Health Certificate Program. His work centers on community health, cultural fluency, indigenous medicine, and ceremonial drumming as approaches to healing and wellness. In collaboration with community, Dr. Nunez developed the medicinal drumming praxis, a model that integrates indigenous medicine, behavioral health, and Afro-Puerto Rican rhythms. Welcome, Dr. Nunez. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, Socorro. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. It's a pleasure and honor to be able to have this conversation with you. I wanted to, before having the conversation, to acknowledge our ancestors, right? To acknowledge the sacrifice and the contributions that they all made to open the path to get us all here today, to our elders and mentors, to our community and to our families for the support and nourishment in making all of this happen, so that we can continue bringing this word to the future generations.
Well, we're excited to be with you también in community, and we're just looking forward to sharing your insight, experience, and your wisdom. I know you have many years of working in community and doing practice of ancestral medicine and working with so many different people. I know I first met you at Instituto Familiar de la Raza in a drumming circle, as we were both working with specifically the Community Response Network outreach team. So it's good to see you, and it's also good to hear your voice, and always look forward to our conversation.
Likewise.
After listening to the live episode called Community Mental Health, Nuestro Sagrado Salud, could you comment and give perspective to what you heard in the discussion?
I want to share that the podcast and discussion was very inspirational, and it was really deep in details and in information that anyone who listens to that podcast will be able to get a sense of the true meaning of cultura cura and how that is integrated within community to support our members, our community members, in the journey towards wellness and recovery. There's some number of perspectives that I have that I want to share. And before discussing that, I first want to draw the attention to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. And I'm saying this because they have 8 dimensions of wellness. And this organization is a reputable organization that is a leading federal organization for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The 8 dimensions of wellness are emotional, environmental, financial, intellectual, occupational, physical, social, and spiritual. I mention those because one of the most important dimensions of wellness is not listed in there, and that is the dimension of cultural wellness. And we can see that as a large federal organization is not thinking of culture as a healing approach to health and wellness, that trickles down to statewide, to region, and to local organizations of the government who are not considering that particular dimension in terms of health and wellness. As you know, my wife Edith and I have been talking about this, and we're thinking about how to have conversations with other people so that we can start documenting this as a wellness dimension itself that we know as community and people that it's important. But I wanted to bring that to the attention of the listeners because it is in relation to cultura cura. And if the government is not listing cultural wellness as an important dimension in health, then it means that they are not considering the implications of cultura cura in the work that we do as providers in our communities. So in terms of the conversation, I heard my perspectives was that the panelists, right, all of them, Doctora Lisbeth, Metzi, and Michelle Alvarez, were all on point with what they said, right? And the focus was cultura cura, like the overarching perspective was cultura cura. I heard them, the culturally centered and grounded practices that liberate, empower, and heal, right? This is cultura. Importance of cultivating community health and community-based collective actions. The conversation also talked about fostering and nurturing providers that are culturally affirming and adaptable. How oppression is embedded within the colonialistic systems and self-care and sustainability. And as I listen to all the different topics that I am mentioning now as themes, I found that the conversations were very thoughtful and very indicative of the experience that individuals who have been mentored by elders and community, how they move in working with our population in a way that empowers and leads to health and self-determination. So in terms of cultural centered and grounded practices and how they liberate and empower people, we know that we are working in our community as a collectivistic society. And the systems that we talk about are coming from a Eurocentric, individualistic perspective. So just right off the bat, they do not intersect, right? They are parallel, but one is focusing on the individual and the other one is focusing on the collective. And the difference is that in the collective perspective of health and wellness, when we're talking about cultura cura, we're bringing in all our ancestral wisdom, right? We're bringing in ceremonia, ancestral wisdom, prayer, temezcal, music, dance, symbolism, altares, all these things that represent who we are as a people, which in an individualistic society, none of that is considered. They're not thinking about how all these factors are critical for our wellness and health because they are part of the expression of culture. And culture shapes us, right? It shapes our mind, it molds our identity, it fosters belonging, and is inclusive of language, values, beliefs, morals, rules, epistemology, and all these different things that when we are talking about cultura cura, all of these elements that I mentioned are embedded within that, as opposed to a treatment approach that is individualistic and that is only focused on interventions for the person. So I heard the panelists speak about that in a way that was very descriptive and that gave the listeners an opportunity to know and learn how to practice these principles when they are interacting with our community members.
When we spoke with Dr. Concepcion Saucedo, Concha, one of the co-founders of Instituto, she mentioned that instead of just looking at it as community mental health, to look at it as overall health, community health, because you can't just treat one part. You have to look at the entire person and the entire community. I guess I want to just dive a little bit deeper into like asking, when you listen to what they're saying, each one of them mentions at one point how they took their own personal journey into transitioning into doing this work and what they brought from what they were taught. Can you share a little bit about when you were in Puerto Rico growing up, some of the things maybe you saw that led you into community health.
Hmm. Yes, thank you, Socorro. I was born in New York, but I was raised in Puerto Rico. And I was raised in a small community that is 4 blocks by 4 blocks. So everybody knows each other still till today, right? I go and visit my sister, and I know a lot of folks there. So as I was growing up, we know that the power grid in Puerto Rico is deficient, right? It doesn't work as it should. And at night, we would lose power. And I could see the edge of the Milky Way. I would look up into the sky, right? At 7 years old, I started living in Puerto Rico. And I could look up into the sky and see the edge of the Milky Way. And my abuela, my grandmother, used to tell me, mijo, we are part of that, right? We are part of that. And we are stardust. We are made of stardust. And, at 7 years old, I really didn't understand like what she was talking about. But I remember also going to the yard where she would work on medicinal plants. She would have a lot of medicinal plants. And that's one of the reasons I try to use these plants as well. And she would tell me, whenever you feel angry or you feel upset about something, work with the earth, right? Touch the earth with your hands, allow your energy to flow into the earth and receive that energy from the earth. My grandfather, he was part of the indigenous people of Puerto Rico, the Taínos. And we used to go to some sacred locations where the Taíno had carved petroglyphs, particularly like in a river bed where there would be some petroglyphs on the rock, and then they would be reflected into the water. And he would tell me that this represented the duality of life, the spirit and the material, that the material was the rock where the petroglyphs were carved on, and the spiritual was the water where they were reflected. And when you tried to hold them, you couldn't because it was water. So you couldn't see spirit, but you could feel it. You can feel it. And I grew up with these teachings from my grandparents and from my mother as well. As a young man, I ended up going to military service because I felt that it was a way for me to project and release anger that I had as growing up as a young man, which I can relate to some of the folks that I have worked with in the community. The pain, right, that we experience as we're growing up and how that comes out. After I came out of the military, I was in a journey seeking how to reestablish myself back into civilian life and not knowing exactly how to go about doing that. And I remember that one day I was meditating and it just all of a sudden hit me that I needed to reconnect with my culture. And I decided to continue seeking, cultural learnings from individuals who were versed in that and who were cultural holders. And I went to study music because I felt that music was medicine, right? And we know that music is medicine. There are many medicinas, and music is one of them. And I studied music, and I came to San Francisco because my mother was living here across the street from rap. And one of my brothers went to rap in the 80s. And I remember that I started seeing what was happening in the community. And also because I had grown up in a home where there was violence, I wanted to understand a little bit deeper why people would become violent, even though I understood that part of it was injury and anger. So I started studying psychology and received a bachelor's, then got a master's, and then got a PhD in psychology. But what I do remember, Socorro, is that as I was going through school, all the information and all the books that I read never reflected who I was as a Puerto Rican man. They never reflected the teachings that my grandparents taught me and my mother taught me about our connection to the earth, our connection to the elements, and how cultura curas, right? And I found that to be very disappointing, even though I knew that that medicine was powerful for the people they had been created for, but I knew it had not been created for me and for my community. So I got a gig at Instituto Familiar de la Raza when La Doctora Concepción Saucedo, Concha, was the executive director in 1999. And I had this idea of doing a drumming circle where we would work with young men who were experiencing a lot of injury and hurt as a result of things that were happening in their life. And I spoke to her about the idea of creating this drumming circle. And she said, by all means, this sounds really good. Go ahead and do it, right? So we had our first drumming circle in 1999 in the old Instituto, which was above una de las taquerías on Mission,
Oh,
close to
yeah.
24th Street. I don't remember the exact address, but it was up there.
Yeah.
And we did a celebration. We invited some musicians and some families and came and did a blessing to the drums and the círculo, and that was the beginning. And then I continued working at Instituto for another approximately 15 years, where I was running a drumming circle every Thursday night with young men. And we would have at times 5, and other times we would have 25. And that led to me being interested in how the drumming was a tool of wellness and health, and how all traditions in the world that I know of anyway, when I was doing my research, have some sort of drum, right? Where they gather together in circle, they use medicine, they use sacred medicine plants, they use music, they use song and dance to be able to relieve and release that energy that accumulates as we move through life and experience injury. So then from there, I went to work at City College, and I found myself in a place where was definitely colonialistic in nature, right? A mentality of sitting
Right.
people in rows and looking at the back of everybody's head. And I walked into the classroom, I said, all right, let's do a circle, right? We're going to do the U, we're going to do a circle. We got to see each other. We got to be able to connect with each other. And I found myself bringing in popular education, creating a space where people were learning from each other, as opposed to me top down giving and feeding information. And based on relationship, on love, on empathy, on mi otro yo, right? Seeing myself in the other and treating the other with the love and the respect that I wanted to be treated with, and that I know that every human being deserves. And now that's led to where I am now. So that's in a nutshell, like the trajectory
Yeah.
of that journey.
I just want to dig in a little bit. The podcast is deeply rooted in oral history and community empowerment. When we're looking at the institution of public mental health and its practices, how does La Cultura Cura, the blueprint rooted in ancestral medicine, impact the historical and institutional structure of community health and its practices for individual mental health?
Well, the parallel between public mental health and cultura cura is very broad in terms of being in opposite ends. And one, you have a system that is based on colonialism, and colonialism by nature inherently oppresses our communities, where when we're working from a cultura cura, we're liberating our communities. So we have these two poles: one is oppression and one is liberation. Now, whether the system is consciously doing that or unconsciously, it has a different meaning. However, it has the same result, right? And the result is that we find our people oppressed with lack of resources and in positions that are discriminatory in nature, where we're looking at cultura cura and historically how it has been used. It's a movement of liberation, right? Through all the things that we've mentioned, through the connection of our identity. When I know who I am, when I know where I stand, when I know who came before me, and when I'm connected to my lineage, I walk with power. I may be alone, but I do not walk by myself. I am walking with all those who came before me. So identity and teaching our community the connection to identity is very important. I frequently told young people there's a mural in Instituto where están los templos, where people call pirámides, right? And I told them, do you realize that this is part of your DNA? That the knowledge that was needed and utilized to create those sacred temples that are aligned to the cosmos required a high level of intellect and connection to the universe, And that lives within you right now. All you need to do is reactivate that DNA, and all that knowledge will be at your disposition, right? That ancestry that we have, the community, the connection to spirituality, the collective belonging, all these things are just so powerfully healing and therapeutic, and are at a whole different spectrum than the individualistic perspective of therapy within the systems of public health. Also, we love people. And one of those 5 principles of RAP is love and serve the people, right? And we love and serve the people. When we serve the people, we are serving ourselves, because eres mi otro yo. So if I'm serving you, I'm serving myself. The self-determination, the social activism, the deinstitutionalization of institutions, and institutionalization of funding for new systems, right? This is all the things that need to happen. Learning and moving, treating others with dignity and respect. These are all things that it signals, I see you, I hear you, and you are important in this world, where a lot of our injury comes from being discriminated, from being oppressed, from not being seen and not being heard. So our cultura cura counters all those injuries that we experience in a system that is by design to keep us down and to oppress us. And I know those are strong words, but that's how it is. Right? That's how it is, right?
We got to call it what it is. In the conversation with the panelists, we slightly touched on, unfortunately, the huge budget cuts that are happening in San Francisco. And one of those departments is public health, something like $60 million major cuts that are coming down the pipe. And oftentimes the organizations, the nonprofits, the clinics are the most impacted. What are you doing to sort of integrate, to prepare, to get folks ready to work in this field, to keep them motivated? And what are your thoughts on that? You mentioned earlier that you and your compañera Edith did a workshop with public health about some of the strategies that you're building around sustaining this work. Is there some thought you have on that? And specifically, what should clinics do? How can we move? What are some of the strategies that could be built around that?
Yeah. This is a lot, because it always comes down to, how do we as people sustain the work that needs to happen without the resources from the system? So it becomes overwhelming. But we have survived, right? We have survived many different things, and we're still here, and we still move forward, and we're still having beautiful children, and we're still influencing the world in many different ways. So the cuts are devastating. They are impacting institutions in our communities that have proven to be able to support community in the way that is meaningful to community towards achieving health and wellness. The system contracts these organizations because they know that they can do the job that the system is unable to do. And yet, there are cuts that are happening. These cuts, apparently, in my understanding, they're coming down from the federal administration that definitely is not in favor of us living a quality life, and then it trickles down into our communities. One of the things that at least we're doing, that Edith and I are doing, and that I heard that other folks are doing in the community as well, is we have to engage in social activism and social advocacy. Because if I'm going to get shot, I'm going to make a ruckus before I get shot. I'm not just going to go down getting, okay, well, they're going to shoot me and I'm not going to say anything. It's like, hell no. I'm going to make a ruckus, right? So the analogy is that if we're going to be impacted, I'm going to advocate for that, right? I'm going to organize. One of the things that we've been doing is we're organizing students. We're calling upon folks who are like-minded. We're going and sending
You are listening
messages to
the
the
RAMA
Board of
Blueprints
Supervisors,
podcast.
meeting with
Extra
folks.
commentary.
We're going
Tres
to
generaciones,
rallies and
three voices.
conversations with
Nuestra sagrada
organizations,
salud,
and just taking
community
action,
mental health,
trying to get the community
commentary
involved in
by Dr. Sal
movimiento, right,
Nunez.
in action, so that
Welcome
the
to the
system
RAMA Blueprints
realizes that
podcast. I'm your
we
host,
are still
Socorro
here
Gamboa.
and that
The
we are
following is
going
commentary
to
by Dr. Sal
resist
Nunez on the May
the
28,
oppression
2026
that
live
is
episode,
placed on
Nuestra
us
Sagrada
through
Salud,
lack of
Community
financial
Mental Health,
resources.
recorded
Right? So
at
these
Brava
are
Women
things
for the
that
Arts in San
require
Francisco's
what I
Mission
mentioned,
District.
social activism, social advocacy, and the ability to
Thank you
bring
for
people
listening
together.
to this extra
One of my
commentary.
visions,
We want to
Socorro, is
thank
what you're
Dr.
doing
Salvador
in a
Nunez
different
for his
way, right?
commentary.
I saw that
We
you
also
have
extend a
a
special thank
podcast
you
with
to
the
our fiscal
Samoan
sponsors,
community. You
Brava
have
for
a
Women in the
podcast with
Arts and
different
CARECEN San
groups of
Francisco.
individuals.
And a
And I
special
think that
gracias
this
to Instituto
solidarity
Familiar de la
that we
Raza,
are able to
United
develop with
Players,
other
SALT,
communities is
Horizons
it
Unlimited
fortifies
Incorporated,
and nurtures
the
us,
California Arts
nurtures us.
Council
And
Impact
even
Grant,
if we are
and the
unable to get the
individual
funding,
donors for their
we
vital
know
support.
that
You can
our
contribute to the
integrity
podcast
remains
and
intact
listen
because we
to
did what
all
we needed to
archived
do.
episodes
We
of the RAMA
supported other
Blueprints by
communities and we
visiting
had other communities support us.
CARECENSanfrancisco.org.
And we have learned to move forward with the little resources
You
that
can
we have,
contribute
even
to
though
the
it's very
podcast
unfair.
and listen to
We
all
know
archived
that our community
episodes
members
of
are
RAMA
going to
Blueprints
share a
by
little bit with
visiting
each other. Mi abuela siempre me
CARECENSF.org
decía, my
website,
grandmother always
or
told me,
wherever you
when
listen
someone
to your
comes to your
favorite
house, even
podcast.
if you just have a little bit of food,
Remember,
you share it
to
with them,
listen is
right?
to
You
hear.
share it with them. And I know that
All
those
power
principles are
to the
embedded
people.
in our culture because they are powerful
Man, I
and
was
that
on
our
a
people
flow.
will do what they need to do to be able to continue
I was like
networking
rolling,
and
and then I
supporting each
said
other through
CARECEN
these
San
difficult
Francisco.
times.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank
wow.
you for those words. Did you get it? Because of the new generations of young people that are, they're graduating and they're coming into this work and they decide this is the route they want to take. And I think that young people need
You
to
can
hear
contribute
what's
to the
kept people like
podcast and
yourself,
listen
like
to
myself,
all archived
motivated. And
episodes
what
of the
words
RAMA
of wisdom would
Blueprints
you share with them?
podcast by visiting
Yeah,
CARECENSF.org
thank you.
or
This
wherever
is
you
real
listen to
hard
your
work
favorite
and it
podcast.
requires a lot of spiritual fortitude. I
Do it
believe
again, but don't say
that
RAMA
we
Blueprints
come
podcast.
to
Just say
be
RAMA.
of service to others.
Okay, go
and
ahead.
That happens in many different ways. At the community
You
level
can
that we're
contribute to
talking
the
about in
podcast and
terms
listen
of
to all archived
the work that
episodes
we
of
do
RAMA
as
Blueprints
providers,
by visiting
it requires
CARECENSF.org
to
or wherever you
understand
listen to
that
your favorite podcast.
when I'm helping someone else, I'm helping myself, and I'm also helping future generations. When we're speaking about families and youth, we're talking about future generations, Socorro, as you know, that an action that I
Mateo.
take right now will have ramifications for eternity, because even if I don't see it, right, it will have that type of ramification. So to be mindful of living a life that really you decide to, with conviction, to give yourself to it. I do have some things that I want to share in terms of what people might be able to do to sustain that work, right? In my learning as a young man, I really had to go through a process to learn emotional regulation, And I think that when we're doing this work, it's important to learn how to and practice emotional regulation so that we can deal with all the adversities that are going to be coming our way. To develop and utilize a strong social support network, that's going to be really critical for the young people coming into it. Practice self-care and view challenges and crises as opportunities for growth, maintaining a problem-solving, solution-focused mindset, right? These are internal things that is important, in my opinion, to be able to nurture, develop, and foster. As we're working within these systems, it's important to stay up to date with the policy, to learn from the system and learn how the system functions so that we are able to move within it in a way that is successful. For the younger people and those of us who have been doing this for a while as well, is to continue developing your leadership skills and learn community organizing, bringing people together, remain innovative, stay connected to culture, traditional medicine, and ancestral healing practices. Consult with your elders for guidance, wisdom, and truth. And to be able to enjoy the journey, because there is a lot of positive growth that comes out of doing this work, which involves a lot of sacrifice. So those are some of the things that I would recommend for younger people to be able to sustain their work as they're moving through community engagement and involvement.
Well, I want to thank you so much for those words, and gracias de todo corazón.
Socorro, can I tell a quick story?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, how this might relate to the young people. So, not long ago, there was a little butterfly who thought it could not create any change in the world because it couldn't even fly straight. And one day, that butterfly landed on a little flower and started to flap its wings. And as a result of the flapping of the wings, a little bit of pollen came up into the air, and there was a gazelle standing next to the flower. And the pollen went into the gazelle's nose, and the gazelle went, "Achoo!" And there were a million water buffaloes standing nearby, and they began to run and run and run and run. And a huge cloud of dust was formed, and it went up into the air. And Grandfather Wind came along and moved that cloud of dust over the Atlantic Ocean. And because the temperature between the water and the cloud changed, the wind began to spin and spin and spin, and a hurricane was born. And the hurricane moved over South Florida during the time of the harvest of the oranges, and it destroyed all the fields. And the people who were going to harvest the oranges no longer had a job. Those who were going to take the oranges from the field to the factory no longer had a job. Those who were going to work in the factory to turn the oranges into orange juice didn't have a job. And when we went to the supermarket to buy orange juice, there was none on the shelf. And this was all because a little flapping of the wings of a butterfly who thought it would not create any change in the world. So imagine you as a young person, as anyone who shares word medicine, the impact that you could have on individuals through your intelligence, through your ambitions, through your contributions to the community. If a little butterfly was able to do that with the flapping of the wings, imagine what you could do with your words and your presence. And that's something that I would like to let young people stay with. So gracias.
Whoa. We truly appreciate you spending time with us. May you continue with good health, sound mind, and walk firmly with your feet planted on the ground, and always with a lot of love and respect, Sal, for just who you are and the work you have been doing and how you've inspired so many generations of young people and the generations of the future to come. I always feel like it was a blessing to meet you at Instituto and appreciate the work that we did together for those young men and the young women that we're doing outreach on. I really value that friendship we have. So you have been listening to the RAMA Blueprints podcast. Thank you to our guest, Dr. Salvador Nunez, and him sharing his personal story, his wisdom. We hope you continue to support and sponsor the podcast. Thank you. Gracias. Thank you for listening to this extra commentary. We want to thank Dr. Salvador Nunez for his commentary. We also extend a special thank you to our fiscal sponsors, Brava for Women in the Arts and CARECEN San Francisco. And a special gracias to Instituto Familiar de la Raza, United Players, SALT, Horizons Unlimited Incorporated, the California Arts Council Impact Grant, and the individual donors for their vital support. You can contribute to the podcast and listen to all archived episodes of RAMA Blueprints by visiting CARECENSF.org or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Remember, to listen is to heal. All power to the people.